Transitioning to the NFL, obviously the story, Jon Gruden resigning as the head coach of the Las Vegas Raiders. We know that. But what I want to talk about is the fact that now the NFLPA, the players union of the NFL, is requesting the entire chain of emails, the entire email thread between Jon Gruden and the Washington football team. Now, of course, let me just first say that Jon Gruden, of course, was, he was basically forced to resign or be fired. But for optics standpoint, he was given the opportunity by Mark Davis to resign because of the racially insensitive, discriminatory, homophobic, and misogynistic emails that he sent to the owner of the Washington football team, Dan Snyder. And even the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who he had won a Super Bowl with as a head coach, just removed him from their Ring of Honor, which honors the most important people in your franchise's success. The Dallas Cowboys have a Ring of Honor. Almost every single NFL franchise has a Ring of Honor where you honor people that made major contributions to your team. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers now just said, nope, Jon, we recognize what you did on the field. Off the field, this isn't what we stand for. And obviously what he did was appalling. It is repulsive. It's disgraceful, let alone even uttering derogatory and discriminatory and insensitive remarks is intolerable. And it's shameful what he did. It truly is. And this was the only option for him. And it probably reveals a lot more about his true character than what we were led to believe. But it's one thing, again, to make insulting or offhanded remarks in passing or to a friend or a confidant. It's another thing entirely altogether, and I'm not going to touch on this too much. It's another thing entirely altogether to explicitly type out an email and deliberately send that email. An email doesn't automatically send. It saves as a draft. It's in draft form first. You as the individual have to explicitly press the send button for it to be disseminated out. So Jon Gruden knew exactly what he did. He meant to do it. He was acting in a perverse manner. He knew exactly what he was doing. So that's the bottom line. But here's the interesting thing about this. The Washington football team was already in the news, and Dan Snyder, the owner of the Washington football team, was already in the news because of sexual harassment claims against them, about treatment of women, that the inappropriate conduct towards women that persisted in their organization. So sexual harassment claims were made, and now the entire team is being investigated. And through these investigations that were entirely separate from Jon Gruden's interactions and from everything that's revolving around Jon Gruden, which is entirely separate at the moment, now all of a sudden, in that investigation, the Washington football team, that's where they discovered and procured some of these emails that were sent between Jon Gruden and Dan Snyder, the owner of the Washington football team. So we knew that Dan Snyder was already an awful owner. Now we're adding another layer of complexity. And the reason why this is interesting to me is because clearly, if Jon Gruden felt that he was communicating with this individual freely in this manner and that he was allowed to behave in this environment, if he felt like this environment fostered and encouraged this type of behavior, then clearly this type of language had always been permitted between he and Dan Snyder. That what else could be revealed through these emails? How far back can we trace this? because now it's probably going to expose some emails that were either responded or it's sent or had been sent before between he and between him and Mr. Snyder and Dan Snyder, the owner. And it might open up a whole can of worms and kind of thrust us into this further rabbit hole where it might reveal a whole lot more. And it might reveal a lot more about how this type of language was fostered and who else has been using this type of language. It might expose a whole lot more. And we've always known that racism, or at least we've believed that racism was a systemic and an institutionalized issue. And if we go further down this rabbit hole and take a deeper dive at some of these emails, it might corroborate that, and it might expose some legitimate institutionalized racism that's been existent between these individuals and other owners. Who knows what this might expose about some other owners in the NFL? We saw Donald Sterling in the NBA. His mistress secretly, discreetly recorded him saying, uttering racially insensitive remarks and discriminatory statements. And ultimately, the NBA forced him to sell his team. That might give the NFL license to follow suit and demand that Dan Snyder sell his team for a bunch of other reasons why he should have already sold his team, just because he's a bad owner. And again, Donald Sterling was an abominable owner. And so this will give the NFL license to perhaps follow the same suit if they discover that in more emails, there's more information revealed about how these owners have been communicating with each other, how the owners have been communicating with Jon Gruden. And that type of pervasive hatred and bigotry is intolerable, shouldn't be allowed at all. And again, it just further fosters that kind of insidious behavior. And so I think that this is a huge story, not just the Jon Gruden aspect, but the fact that if the NFLPA can get their hands on these emails, well, now we can really trace and see how far back this goes to. Can see how far back this goes to. We all thought that Urban Meyer was in a heap of trouble, right? Just last week, we thought the weight of the world was on Urban Meyer. And sure, his infidelity was shameful. And the fact that he was hypocritical, he probably lost the respect of a lot of, if not all, the players in the locker room, and they probably lost the faith and the trust in him as a person. But with all this Jon Gruden breaking news, the Urban Meyer story is kind of an afterthought. And of course, listen, he'll have to painfully work through his own personal relationship with his wife and his kids. But from this perspective, that's a lesser story than the Jon Gruden incident. So I think that we've just scratched the surface on this issue. I think there's going to be a deluge of new information that will be brought to the surface in the next coming days, likely. This is a huge story that I think is only going to get bigger and bigger and bigger.